Well, God, we come to that time where that's exactly what we want to do. We want to have a little talk with Jesus. We want to know how we take a word that's 2,000 years old and apply it to our lives today. What does it mean? How are we going to follow it? And how will it change not only us, but those around us? May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be pleasing in your sight. Through Jesus, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. The scripture that you heard Sheba read to you is the ending of the story of Joseph. Let me give you some of the rest of the story. And I'm only going to be able to give you the Reader's Digest version because I've already heard numerous ones of you last week told me I should take lessons from the youth. When I got time to get you out of here. Again, you haven't let me preach for a few weeks, so don't bet on it. What's the old joke? You know what it means when a pastor takes his watch off and lays it on the pulpit? Absolutely nothing. Joseph was one of 12 sons, born to a man named Jacob. Remember Jacob? Jacob and Esau, Isaac's boys. And Jacob didn't learn something that the rest of us learned, because we all know as moms, dads, grandmas, grandpas, you don't have favorites. Right? It's in the rule book. And if you do have favorites, you don't show it. At least to the rest of them. Well, you know, Jacob was breaking the rules from the time he came out of the womb, holding on to Esau's heel, to the rest of his life. And this was one he broke to. He not only had a favorite, and his name was Joseph, he showed it. He made no bones about it. He treated him different. He gave him different food. He loved on him more so than the other ones. And even got him a special coat. Remember that story? The coat of many colors. Is it any wonder that the other brothers grew to dislike Joseph? I would. Wouldn't you? There'd be a little animosity there. Be a little trouble going on there. And then to make matters worse, Joseph was a tattletale. Joseph would see what his older brothers and siblings were doing and go back and tell Jacob. We don't like it when our brothers or sisters tattle on us, do we? Well, guess what? Neither did the rest of Jacob's sons. All of which were had by 3 different wives and 1 slave girl. Jacob, who became Israel, and the 12 sons became the 12 tribes of Israel. Are you starting to hear the story now? But then, that wasn't enough. Joseph had dreams. And Joseph interpreted dreams. And he had one where he told his brother, now I'm thinking, I'd like to think I'd be smart enough if I had this dream, I would keep it to myself. But Joseph had a dream where all of his brothers were bowing down to him. And he told them. Well, they're being dissatisfied or detest of him went all the way to hate. One day, the rest of the brothers were out in the field at Jacob's flocks, and they were a ways off. And Jacob told Joseph, why don't you go check on them for me? Probably knowing that whatever they were doing wrong, Joseph would come back and tell him. I'd be sending the tattletale out, wouldn't you? And by this time, the hatred was so strong that they saw him coming from a distance off, and they plotted his death. They grabbed hold of him and threw him into a cistern, where their intention was to just let him die. until that caravan came by. And one of them thought, well, we can make some money off of him. We put up with this junk all this time. We ought to maybe get a little profit out of it. And they sold him to the caravan to the slave traders for 20 pieces of silver. Took his coat of many colors that Jacob would recognize, killed a goat, dipped it in the blood, and took it back to Jacob and said, your son is dead. So Jacob lived the rest of his time until the end of the story, thinking that he had sent his son, his favorite son, to his death, and he got killed by wild animals. If you were Joseph, would you be a little upset by this point? Because of what the people that are supposed to love you did to you? But it gets better. He got sold into slavery in Egypt to a man named Potiphar, who was in charge of I think if I remember right, he was in charge of the armies of Egypt, wasn't he? Had something to do. He was a high-ranking officer in Pharaoh's court. And he bought Joseph and put him to work. Well, pretty soon Joseph, with the grace of God, proved that he was a pretty good manager. And before it was over, this Egyptian official had turned his entire household over to Joseph to run. He had charge. That is until the official's wife decided, hey, he's a pretty fine young specimen. And tried to put the make on him. See, I can be politically correct when I have to be. And Joseph said, out of respect for my master, out of glory to my God, I'm not going to get into hanky-panky. Some women do not take no. You don't like hanky-panky? What word do you want me to use? Oh, somebody's helping me. Okay. I'll pay you later. Okay. But some women do not like to be spurned, do they? And she yelled the magic word, rape, which caused I keep wanting to say Roman, caused the Egyptian official to throw him into prison in Pharaoh's dungeon, where he was there for 2 years. Now, he proved himself there, too, and became in charge of some of the things. He's in jail. He's in prison. And he only gets out after Pharaoh finds out that he can interpret dreams, and Pharaoh's got some disturbing nightmares going on, and he interprets the dreams. And does it right and tells Pharaoh about the famine that's coming on the land. And Pharaoh ends up putting him in charge of all the granaries and barns and stuff that comes in to them for food, which would save all the people during the time of famine. Okay? Not only did it save the Egyptians, but guess what? Jacob's land was under the same famine. And they got hungry. And went to Joseph for food. Long story short, Reader's Digest version, they ended up bringing Jacob and all the kids and relatives and flocks to Egypt, the land of Goshen, I believe it was, where they lived. And that leads into the Exodus story later on. Now, everything's fine. And you heard the scripture that the brothers were afraid that Joseph was going to be pretty upset with them, and he said, don't worry about it. But then Dad died. And the brothers said, without Jacob in the picture, now Joseph will exact his revenge. And that's when you hear the part that was read this morning, a part that we quote from time to time in our own lives. Joseph said, don't worry about it. God did it. I'm here for a reason. I saved how many people? And we have the quote, what mankind meant for evil, God used for good. That's a kind of a nice fairy tale, isn't it? Because I want to ask you this question this morning. How many of you would have been that magnanimous? You didn't know I knew a big word like that, did you? How many of you would have been as understanding and let your brothers off the hook so easy? Because I'm thinking in my mind, I'm going like, well, I'd at least spend the night in the cistern thinking they're going to die. Or maybe we go ahead and feed them all to the wild animals and take their bloody clothes to the relatives and let them deal with it. I'm thinking, until Cheryl proves me wrong, that I want to at least throw them in prison for 2 years to get an answer, to get a little bit of feel of what they put me through. Because you know what? When we come right down to it, we are still Old Testament people. We want an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, do we not? Now some of you are shaking your heads and I know where we're at. But folks, I got news for you. You can't as a Christian. You cannot sit around and wait for your pound of flesh if you're a follower of Jesus Christ. Doesn't work that way. Let me share a story from Matthew with you that drives this point home. It's in the 18th chapter, verses 21 through 25, or 35. Then Peter came to him and asked, Lord, how often should I forgive someone who sins against me? 7 times? No, not 7 times, Jesus replied, but 70 times 7. Somebody do the math. Okay. Somebody did do the math. Cool. Yeah. Is it really a number, or is Jesus saying there is no number? Now, what you got to understand about this, and we'll stop right there for a minute, is Peter thought he was being all that in a cup of coffee too. Because you see, the rabbinic law at the time, the accepted practice of the Jewish culture was this. If you sinned against me repeatedly, I had to forgive you 3 times. If you were stupid enough to do it on the 4th time, you were toast. I no longer had to forgive you. I no longer had to be civil to you. You were nothing. So when Peter asks this question, he's actually telling Jesus, I can be better than what the rabbi says. 7 times I'll forgive them, Lord. Not just 3, I'll go 7. I'll go over what that says. And then Jesus shoots back and says, now, Peter, you don't get it? There is no limit to how often you have to forgive a child of God. And then he launches into this story. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven can be compared to a king who decided to bring his accounts up to date with servants who had borrowed money from him. In the process, one of his debtors was brought in who owed him millions of dollars. He couldn't pay, so his master ordered that he be sold along with his wife, his children, and everything he owned to pay the debt. But the man fell down before his master and begged him, please be patient with me, and I will pay it all. Then his master was filled with pity for him, and he released him and forgave his debt. But when the man left the king, he went to a fellow servant who owed him a few $1,000s. He grabbed him by the throat and demanded instant payment. His fellow servant fell down before him and begged for a little more time. Be patient with me, and I will pay it, he pleaded. But his creditor wouldn't wait. He had the man arrested and put in prison until the debt could be paid in full. When some of the other servants saw this, they were very upset. They went to the king and told him everything that had happened. Then the king called in the man he had forgiven and said, you evil servant, I forgave you that tremendous debt because you pleaded with me. Shouldn't you have mercy on your fellow servant just as I had mercy on you? Then the angry king sent the man to prison to be tortured until he had paid his entire debt. Jesus says, Here's the lesson. Let's have that little chat with Jesus right now, shall we? Because this is the same lesson we're supposed to get today. Jesus said there was a king. And oh, by the way, the king was God. And a man that owed him a lot was drugged before him. Oh, I thought she was coming for me.
I'd be running if I was coming for you.
A man who owed the king more than he could ever repay. And again, it's you in this story. Came in and pled for forgiveness. Came in and said, if you give me time, I'll pay it all back. And the king knew that there's no possible way that if this guy lived for eternity at a regular job that actually maybe even paid a little something, he could never pay back his debt. Impossible. So the king now says, tell you what, I won't throw you in prison. Your wife and kids can continue to live at the house. And, oh, by the way, the debt's forgiven. I'd feel pretty good, wouldn't you? But yet, this guy, the first thing he does is go out, find somebody that owes him something, grabs him by the throat, it says, and what he owes is a pittance compared to what this guy owed the king, and demands his money. And when this guy pleads for some forgiveness, for some time, he just throws him in jail, in debtor's prison, until he pays him back, which I've never understood. You know, there's some things I just don't understand. Like, we take people who owe child support and we take their license away so they can't drive to work, and yet we expect them to pay the bill. Isn't this the same thing? We want you to pay the bill, but we're going to throw you in prison so you can't work to do it. Life sometimes makes no sense, doesn't it? Well, the other servants who had been privy to this whole thing the whole time said, well, this isn't right. Something does not compute. You got forgiven all this, and he only owes you this. You got forgiveness and grace and mercy, and you gave him none of it. It's not right. It's not just. And they went back and tell the king. At which time the first guy's fate changes quickly. Because he pulls him back in and chastises him and says, what were you thinking? I did all this, and then you turn around and instead of sharing the love and the grace and the mercy, you went back to being evil. He even calls him an evil guy, right? And then it says that he threw him not only into prison, but to be tortured until he paid it back. I'm pretty sure that torture part would be for all of eternity. He's talking about hell. And then Jesus wants to make sure we don't miss the point. Because the last verse, 35, says, that's what my heavenly Father will do to you if you refuse to forgive your brothers and your sisters from your heart. Folks, I do not anywhere in there read an if, and, but, or maybe. Neither do I read that when I look at the Lord's Prayer that we'll pray here in a little bit that says, and forgive us our trespasses the way we forgive others. You understand that when you don't forgive, that when you don't share the grace that you've received from the King, from God, that you put yourself in jeopardy of a judgment that I don't want to see. I'm not saying you have to like what they did, and some of it does seem unforgivable, but the book is plain and clear. You must forgive. Period. You don't have to go out to dinner with them. You don't have to have them come over on Saturday and watch a movie and eat popcorn, but you have to forgive them. No matter how much it hurt, no matter how painful it was at the time, no matter how outlandish, if you don't forgive them, they're not the ones that are in jeopardy. You are. And yet, we do have the mentality that I want my pound of flesh. I want to get even. I want to see them suffer this and that. May the fleas of 1,000 camels invest their armpits. That's our mentality. And that's not what it says. Dear God, whatever's going on with Olivia, may you be with her and take care of her. Amen. See you later. Our mentality is supposed to be exactly the opposite. We are forgiven so much by God, and we're supposed to pass it on. And you know, one of the worst places I see this played out is in the Church of Jesus Christ. Those of you that have been in church a long time, think about it. You've seen the same thing and heard the same thing I've heard and seen. We have people who have left the church because somebody said something they didn't like. Right? We have people that won't sit in the same pew with some other people. And if they die, I'm not going to the funeral. You know what they did to me 25 years ago? They wore the same pink hat on Easter that I wore. How dare they? And some of it's that stupid, is it not? Wouldn't you think that in the church of Jesus that you'd have some forgiveness? Wouldn't you think that we would practice it pretty easily? There are so many examples I could give right now, and I'd get myself in trouble, so I won't. But you get my point. We're supposed to set the example. And sometimes we set the wrong example. Sometimes people listen to us and look at us and go like, why would I want to be a Christian? If that's the way they talk about one another and treat each other, I don't think I want to be into that. You have received grace. You must give it. There are no outs on this one. No excuses on this one. You must extend it to those whether you think they deserve it or not. That's just the way it is. Now, I was writing this sermon, which I know I haven't followed, but has he been doing pretty good keeping up with the rabbit? Okay. And I'm not a poet, and I didn't even know it rhymed until I wrote it, but here's an easy way to remember this. What did I write? It's what you must do. God forgives, so must you. Pretty simple, isn't it? Then practice it. Amen? Amen. Amen. Let's sing.